probably an ice-cold take to say that Star Trek's first season was its best. The show's maiden run of episodes doesn't just represent a high point for the franchise, it's a landmark for the sci-fi genre as a whole. There's a reason we're still talking about Star Trek nearly 6 decades later, and really it all comes down to these 29 episodes, considered by many to be the holy grail of Trek. But which episode's the best, and how would I rank them? That's right, we're doing a list. I'm ranking every broadcast episode of Star Trek's first season. I've combined the Menageries two-parter into one entry, and I have also left out The Cage, as even though most streamers tend to include this in this run of episodes, it didn't actually air properly until 1986. I'd also love to know how you would rank these episodes, so feel free to leave your own rankings in the comments below. Right, let's warp into this. I'm the Trek Lad, arbiter of good Star Trek. Hello, and this is every episode of Star Trek the Original Series Season 1, ranked from worst to best. Kicking off the list is Mudd's Women. Yes, the episode gives us Roger Carmel's Harry Mudd for the first time, and while he is a fun character, the rest of the episode doesn't really hold up. The plot essentially boils down to a group of space prostitutes who are addicted to beauty pills. Quite an edgy premise considering the time, but that doesn't make it good. The women are paraded, quite literally, as eye candy, while the male crew members stumble around, making googly eyes at them, and things get worse in the second half as the episode morphs into a slow and awkward domestic drama. The episode ends with the big reveal that the women never actually needed the pills, and while this feels like it's aiming for some sort of empowering message, it doesn't really work. Easily the worst episode of the season. Number 27 is The Squire of Gothos. This is the episode with Trelane, the playful but powerful godlike alien played by William Campbell, whose performance is a highlight in an otherwise disappointing episode. There's a sort of chaotic charm to Trelane, and it's easy to see how this laid the blueprint for what would eventually be perfected on TNG with John Delancey's Q. But on the whole, this is a mostly frustrating hour that struggles to come together. The biggest issue is that it spends most of its runtime spinning its wheels. It doesn't really go anywhere until 3/4 of the way through, and by then it's just too little too late. Trelane himself, while well acted, ends up being more irritating than anything else, and there's a repetitiveness to his antics that wears thin pretty quickly. And then there's the twist where we find out he's actually a kid when his parents reappear out of nowhere, tell him off, and essentially send him to his room. This is meant to be a clever reveal that has something to do with war viewed through the eyes of a child, but this doesn't come through very strong and feels more like an abrupt excuse to wrap things up than actually give us a satisfying payoff. Number 26 is Shore Leave. I know this episode has its fans, but yeah, this one doesn't do much for me. There are things I like. I like the on-location photography, which looks lush and makes a nice change to all the soundstage alien planets we'd seen for most of the series up to this point. I also like some of the character moments, particularly all of the stuff with Bones, who makes the most of a meatier script. But overall, I think the episode tries too hard to be quirky, leaning heavily into whimsy, which has never really been my thing. The pacing also feels uneven, not helped by the fact that there's not really a strong narrative thread to latch onto. It all just feels a bit scattergun. And then there's the late reveal where we learn all these dangers and surreal visuals are actually harmless, and the planet is essentially one big adventure park, one that clearly isn't very well signposted. It's an intriguing concept, but also one that opens up far more questions than the episode has the time or the interest in answering. Give me a Riser episode over this any day. Number 25 is The Alternative Factor. An absolute mess of an episode. There's no question about it. The story's all over the place, the visuals are laughable, and the continuity of Lazarus's beard is enough to make any universe collapse in on itself. But here's the thing, while the episode is undeniably a bit of a disaster, there's actually some stuff going on here that has some promise. I love the parallel universe concept, and the idea of a man being locked in combat with himself for eternity is chilling and stays with you long after watching. It's a fatally flawed episode, no doubt, but there are things in here that make it worth checking out, and I can't help but wonder what this could have been with a tighter script and better execution. Give it a watch if you haven't, even if it's just to have a laugh at the spinning nebula thing and those awful glowy fight scenes. Number 24 is The Return of the Archons. Another episode built around a solid idea, but let down in the execution. The episode gets off to a strong start with the Red Hour, a purge-like event where everyone loses their shit in a wild bender of sex and violence. Window salesmen must love it here. I like the idea of an entire society being controlled by a ruling artificial intelligence, something we'd see later on in Trek with the Borg. But the episode quickly goes downhill after its promising first act. It gets baggy in the middle as Kirk and co spend what feels like forever speculating and scheming, and this kind of kills the momentum. The climax, where Kirk essentially gaslights Landru into self-destructing, is memorable and kind of funny, although this probably wasn't what the episode intended. It's a very TOS ending, something that we'd see Kirk do a few more times over the course of the show. But rather than highlighting Kirk as the master of circular logic, it just kind of comes across as a bit silly. Number 23 is Court Martial. I like the hook with Kirk, the supposed golden boy of Starfleet, being put on trial for the death of a crew member. The courtroom scenes are entertaining, I like the procedural feel, and I like the old school lawyer whose distrust of technology helps drive one of the episode's more interesting concepts. The idea of whether we can trust technology, especially when it's being used as evidence against someone, is a compelling one, and for a while it feels like the episode is going somewhere interesting. But this doesn't last long as things start falling off in the back half. Turns out the crew member Kirk is accused of killing isn't actually dead. He faked his death and somehow managed to tamper the logs to frame Kirk. This doesn't make a lot of sense, and we never find out how the crewman is able to create such a convincing video log to hang on the captain. And then it all ends in a fistfight in engineering, where any hopes of a satisfying resolution is just buried under punches thrown by some very obvious stuntmen. The verdict? Another episode guilty of starting strong, but eventually fizzling out. Number 22 is Miri. Here the Enterprise discovers a planet identical to Earth, a massive, mind-blowing discovery, but one the episode isn't remotely interested in exploring. Instead, the episode focuses on the planet's inhabitants, a society that inadvertently wiped itself out, leaving only the children who began to age incredibly slowly. The kicker here, though, is as soon as the kids reach puberty, they turn into crazed zombie-like creatures. On paper, this unique dystopian world sounds like a brilliant idea, but once again the execution is lacking. Everything we see is disappointingly small in scale, with the majority of scenes mostly confined to a couple of drab rooms. And the kids, I'm sorry to say, are a problem. They just don't behave like children who have been alive for hundreds of years. It's hard to accept that the kids have survived this long, living the way they have. It's another episode that starts with an incredibly strong hook, but quickly fades, replaced with a frustratingly limited scope and thin storytelling. And we never do get an answer to how Miri's planet is an exact duplicate of Earth, and that's annoying. Number 21 is Errand of Mercy. This is the episode that gives us the Klingons for the first time, led here by Kor, played by the brilliant John Colicos. His scenes with Kirk are great, with a lot of tension and some great back and forth exchanges between the two. This is very much an anti-war story, and the premise is solid, with the Federation and the Klingons on the brink of war, with the seemingly primitive Organians caught in the middle. The big twist is that the Organians are actually non-corporeal beings with the power to stop the conflict, And that's what they do. But I find the Organians frustrating. Why did they wait so long to intervene? Why not step in sooner to prevent unnecessary damage and loss of life? And if they're powerful enough to stop this war, where have they been during all the other galactic conflicts we've seen over the years? Maybe I'm being harsh, but I just found the Organians to be smug and unlikable, and the eventual reveal of their true nature left me with more questions than anything else. Number 20 is Arena. This is another Gene Coon special, an anti-war episode that gives us Kirk versus the Gorn, a legendary fight scene, even if it's not aged that well. As iconic and beloved the episode is, I think it's got some major problems. I love the opening that throws us pretty unexpectedly into a conflict between the Federation and the Gorn. The battle on Cestus 3 effectively sells the horror of war without showing too much, a great example of what Trek could do on a budget. We also get some great character moments with a revenge-driven Kirk butting heads with Spock, who urges caution and a more peaceful resolution. It's a conflict that makes quite a lot of sense, and I wish the episode had focused on this a little more. But instead, godlike aliens intervene and force Kirk and the Gorn captain into a drawn-out fight to the death on a barren asteroid. Because we're too savage, and the only way to fix our savagery is, savagery. There is some good stuff here. I like the anti-war message and the hopeful ending, but most of this, particularly the back half of the episode, is just a silly and pretty transparent attempt to work in some action. I get why it's so loved. It's iconic, no doubt, just not one of my favourites. Number 19 is The Man Trap. Despite being an odd choice as Trek's first broadcast episode, this has an interesting structure. Part mystery, part creature feature, with a shape-shifting alien causing all sorts of mayhem aboard the Enterprise. There's a cool sci-fi horror vibe to all this, although the episode does eventually get a bit repetitive. The creature sneaks around the ship, transforms into different crew members, but the tension starts to wear a bit thin after too many similar scenes. That said, I like the ending where Bones is forced to kill the creature who has taken the form of someone he was once in love with. DeForest Kelly's excellent in this scene, an early moment that effectively demonstrated the dramatic and emotional depth the show was capable of. There's also something haunting about the revelation that the creature was the last of its kind. The episode draws parallels to our own history of hunting animals to extinction, and it's this idea that sticks with me more than anything else. Number 18 is The Naked Time. This is the one where a mysterious infection causes the crew to lose control or act drunk, which is the most famous way to describe this episode. It's a decent premise that does a good job exploring the deeper motivations of the show's characters in a way that adds lasting depth. Benefiting the most from this is Spock, with this marking the moment we start to understand how Vulcans tick, with the revelation that their calm exterior is thanks to intense discipline and not a biological feature. Take note, Strange New Worlds. Leonard Nimoy is great here, and it's easy to see why the Spock character would become such a focal point of the show moving forward. But aside from this, the episode doesn't completely work for me. Lieutenant O'Reilly is incredibly annoying, his scenes go on far too long, and the scale of the outbreak is frustratingly small. It never really feels like the crew is in real danger. And then there's the ending, where the solution also results in them inventing time warp. This comes out of nowhere and is a bizarre ending that I'm glad never became a regular feature on the show. On the subject of time warp, number 17 is Tomorrow is Yesterday, Trek's first time travel episode. This might be lower on my list than it is yours, but there is still a lot I like about it. I love the cold open where we're thrown into a 1960s Air Force base before the unforgettable shot of the Enterprise in Earth's atmosphere. It's a real what the fuck moment and one of Trek's best opening sequences. What lets the episode down for me mainly are the rules around time travel that don't quite hold up to scrutiny. Tonally, the episode is also a little inconsistent. The subplot with the Enterprise computer flirting with Kirk is an attempt at humour that doesn't quite land and feels disconnected to the story they're trying to tell. At best, it's a distraction to an already busy episode. At worst, it undercuts the drama. A strong concept with an incredible hook and some classic Trek moments, but this feels like the prototype for the kind of time travel stories that Trek would perfect in later shows and movies. Number 16 is Dagger of the Mind, and at this point we're starting to get into the episodes that I really like. I like the central concept with the neural neutralizer, a device that can manipulate the mind and make people start questioning what's real and what isn't. It's a brilliant idea. The episode only scratches the surface of this though. I think modern Trek would absolutely go deeper with something like this, perhaps leaning more into psychological horror, exploring the what is reality angle in a more layered and sophisticated way. Shatner's great in this one, and guest star Mariana Hill is a capable companion despite rocking the shortest miniskirt in the universe. Also great is Morgan Woodward, who is absolutely convincing as a man who has been severely damaged by all these experiments. It's not perfect by any means, but it does deliver strong ideas, solid performances, and moments of genuine threat that makes it a memorable, mind-bending episode. Number 15 is What Are Little Girls Made Of? This is a good, visually striking episode that taps into some strong classic sci-fi ideas. There's a lot of that classic man versus the machine stuff going on here. The episodes focus on questions of what gets lost when we try to replicate humanity through technology, provide interesting thought starters. The episode is clear to point out that machines can't quite replicate what makes us human, with emotion and intuition and even soul. It's an idea that still resonates, particularly today with AI increasingly present in every aspect of our day-to-day lives. The episode is also unique, being a mostly chapel-centric story, which makes a nice change to the norm. Majel Barrett gives a good performance as the conflicted nurse, and we get more into her backstory through her relationship with Dr. Corby, who, as we later find out, is no longer the man she remembers. And of course, there's Sherry Jackson's Andrea, one of Corby's androids, who makes quite the impression. She's absolutely stunning, yes, but there's also something substantive about her character and her role in the story. A strong episode, visually striking, thematically interesting, and packed with memorable moments. I like this one a lot. Number 14 is The Menagerie, the only two-parter of the series, and a clever way to repurpose the show's original unaired pilot. This is the episode with the memorable reveal of Captain Pike, severely disfigured and confined to a beeping life support chair after a catastrophic accident. It's one of Trek's more iconic visuals, even if the effects and depiction of disability feel a bit crude by today's standards. This is also a great Spock story. His defiance of Starfleet orders and willingness to save his former captain at the risk of damaging his relationship with Kirk makes for some very effective drama. This is also a great example of how creative the show could be. By reusing existing material, the show didn't just get themselves out of a production pickle, but they also found a way to enrich the universe and its characters in the process. Yes, it leans heavily on the cage, a little too heavily to the point it feels clunky at times, but it uses the material with purpose, giving the show's original forgotten captain a nice sense of closure. That said, if I had to choose between this and the cage, I'd probably go with the cage, as it's tighter and a little bit more focused. Number 13 is The Enemy Within, an iconic episode, and for good reason. People like to point out the plot hole with the lack of shuttlecraft, and while it's definitely an oversight, it's never really bothered me that much. What makes this episode work so well is Shatner, whose performance here gives birth to what we now refer to as the Shatnerism, perfectly exemplified in the unforgettable moment where evil Kirk sees his other self and completely loses his shit. Fandom defining stuff right here. The core idea here is strong as well. The struggle between our good and evil selves. The idea that we actually need our darker instincts to be whole. It's a complex and debatable concept for sure, but the episode commits to it and explores it in an engaging way. But the episode isn't entirely without flaws. The scene with evil Kirk and Rand is uncomfortable, and rightfully so, but the way she's treated afterwards is undeniably poor. Another one of those unfortunate elements that reflects the show's dated production and values. Still, this is a memorable episode with a big idea, a great showcase for our main hero, and all in all is a classic early Trek. Number 12 is The Conscience of the King. This one stands out because it's not really a sci-fi episode, more a character-driven drama. The episode gives us some big revelations around Kirk's past, and this adds depth to the character in a way we hadn't seen before. This is also the start of Trek's long love affair with Shakespeare, kicking off what would become a long tradition of Shakespearean-themed episode titles throughout the franchise. The theatricality, the language, the moral weight, and eventual tragedy, it all fits well into the Trek universe, and it's used effectively here. TOS is a fascinating character, and the episode does a great job exploring the complexity of his past actions and the burden of guilt. His daughter Lenore is also an intriguing character, both in her relationship with Kirk and her own agenda, which is revealed in the episode's dramatic final moments. I think this episode gets slept on. It might not be top tier Trek, but it's a quieter, more character-driven episode that deserves more recognition for breaking the show's storytelling mold. Number 11 is This Side of Paradise. This is the one where the Enterprise discovers a planet with spores that then infects the crew, including Spock, who falls in love and then hangs from a tree. The episode's probably a bit better than I made out there. This is a great looking episode, making good use of outdoor location shooting, and the story itself is quite cohesive and well told from start to finish. The big draw here is Spock. We get a rare glimpse into his emotional side, and while it runs the risk of demystifying the character, it is a fascinating look with a great performance from Nimoy. We also get more great Shatner material, more of those classic Shatnerisms, with moments that continue to reinforce Kirk's dedication to duty. And we also get more Kirk-Spock conflict, with Kirk goading Spock into anger, a tactic that actually works and is one later shows and movies would use again. This is a solid episode that I think holds up really well. I didn't actually like this much when I was younger, but it's grown on me over the years. No alien spore required. Into the top 10 now, and at number 10 is Operation Annihilate, the final episode of the season. This is one that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough, and I think that should change because this is a quality episode. There's a galactic threat here, the kind of high drama where entire civilizations hang in the balance. What's interesting though is that despite these huge stakes, this still feels like a fairly self-contained episode. Unlike the big sprawling season finales we're used to now, this is tight and focused, and it works well. The personal toll on Kirk is pretty heavy. He loses most of his family, and he's burdened with the possibility that he might have to sacrifice millions of lives to stop this parasitic invasion. I also like the resolution that strikes a great balance between logic and science, with more of that classic Trek spirit of compassion and determination to protect life. That said, the episode is a little overstuffed. Spock going blind is resolved far too quickly, and we don't see enough of the colony to feel the true scale of the invasion. But overall, I think this is an underappreciated episode that provides a satisfying resolution to the first season. It deserves more love, so that's what I'm doing here. Number 9 is Charlie X. This episode marks the beginning of what would become a couple of recurring tropes: godlike aliens and prodigious young men, something we'd get much more of later in TNG, with the boy. Aside from Robert Walker's striking guest performance, the best thing about this episode is the way it defines Kirk, not just as the captain, but as a leader and mentor. We see him trying to guide Charlie, trying to show him how to be a human, even as things start spiraling out of control. The escalation of Charlie's power is genuinely unsettling, especially as his obsession with Rand grows darker and more unstable. There are also some effectively horrific moments, the best of the bunch being the moment Charlie silences a member of the crew by literally taking away her face. Charming. The ending is also strong, with the Phasians swooping in to remove Charlie because he's clearly far too dangerous to be kept around humans. Walker's performance elevates the material. You really feel for him despite his shitty behaviour, and this is an early example of Trek's willingness to engage in more complicated ideas. Number 8 is the Galileo 7. This is a strong episode, the first to put Spock front and centre and really test his character. It's also the first shuttle crash story, the first of what would become a classic Trek trope we'd see many more times over the years. I like how the episode looks, both in its original form and the remastered version. There's a great atmosphere to it, particularly on the planet with the monstrous indigenous creatures hunting the stranded crew. What really makes this episode work, though, is the conflict where Spock has to lead a group of increasingly emotional crewmates, a friction that drives the drama. It is frustrating at times how disrespectful they are towards him, but this serves to stress test his logical approach and highlights just how different he is as a Vulcan among humans. And then there's the episode's big moment, Spock's last-ditch gamble to ignite the fuel to attract the Enterprise's attention. It's a great moment and a real standout of the season. Through it all, Leonard Nimoy gives a fine performance. It's a great showcase episode for the character, but also one that shows just how crucial Nimoy was to the overall show. Number 7 is A Taste of Armageddon. This is a solid episode with a fantastic premise, two civilizations waging a theoretical war through computers with the people paying very real consequences. It's a horrifying and clever commentary on the dangers of sanitizing warfare, making it so clean and efficient it can go on forever without people really feeling the cost. Is Kirk's solution to the conflict a violation of the Prime Directive? Yeah, just a bit, but I think we can forgive him. This is a great example of Kirk's cowboy diplomacy. He sees something that's broken and he steps in to fix it, whether he's actually supposed to or not. That classic "there is a better way" mentality is in full force here, and it's part of what makes him such a great captain. There are issues. The production holds the episode back ever so slightly. The sets are bland and the scope is a little too small once again. But the strength of the premise more than makes up for these small issues. The idea that people would willingly walk into a disintegration chamber because a computer had told them they'd been killed is a chilling one. And honestly, if I was in Kirk's position, I'd probably do what he did. Number 6 is the Corbomite maneuver, and now we're firmly in iconic episode territory. This is a fantastic episode, a strong early hour that helps cement Kirk as a smart and strategic captain, someone more than willing to bluff his way through a life or death situation. The central premise is classic Trek, a mysterious alien threat, high stakes tension, and a resolution that comes through diplomacy rather than blowing shit up. Kirk's bluff with the fictional Corbomite device is brilliant, with the captain essentially playing a high-stakes game of interstellar poker against a seemingly all-powerful opponent. I like the antagonist, Baylock of the First Federation, with his massive ship, the Fesarius, and the visual of the decoy is a memorable one that, I'm not afraid to say, scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. The ending is a little weak, but I get what it was going for. The moral of the story, that we fear what we don't understand and that understanding can lead to peace, is the first real lesson Trek ever taught us, and what a first lesson it was. Number 5 is Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot that was ultimately responsible for getting this first season commissioned. If this hadn't been picked up, it's safe to say that Star Trek as we know it probably wouldn't exist. It might not make much sense in terms of its place in broadcast order, but Who cares? Yes, the uniforms are off and Spock's character isn't quite there yet, but issues aside, this is an often gripping, well-told story all about power corrupting. A big classic theme told through the lens of Kirk's relationship with one of his oldest friends, Gary Mitchell, played by Gary Lockwood. After being zapped by the energy at the edge of the galaxy, Mitchell starts to evolve into something godlike. I love the way the episode slowly escalates, the slow progression from friendship to mortal enemies as Mitchell's power grows out of control. It's cerebral, but it also mixes in action, with Kirk forced to make a brutal choice, and while the final fight scene might be a little silly for some, it's a final confrontation that lands well, emotionally and thematically. It's a very good episode, one that smartly balances philosophical ideas with genuine tension and plenty of action spectacle, which, as we know now, is the recipe for great Trek. Number 4 is Space Seed. This is a classic episode that introduces us to Khan Noonien Singh, one of Trek's most iconic antagonists, and a character that would go on to change the franchise forever, for better or worse. Ricardo Montalban delivers one of the best guest performances of all time, completely convincing as the magnetic, powerful and highly dangerous man who once ruled over millions. You absolutely get why people would follow this man. There's a real charisma and kind of palpable power in his presence. There's also great chemistry between Khan and Kirk, the first moments of what would eventually become one of Trek's all-time great conflicts. I also love the way the episode adds layers to Earth's backstory, introducing the eugenics wars, a catastrophic consequence of humanity's reckless attempts at genetic engineering. Like Where No Man Has Gone Before, the episode also explores the dangers of unchecked power, the idea of absolute power corrupting absolutely. If there's one flaw, it's probably the final act. The episode resolves with a bit of an anticlimactic fist fight between Kirk and Khan. I never really bought that Kirk would be able to physically overpower someone like Khan, so this doesn't really work for me. But everything leading up to this is so strong, it almost doesn't really matter. Space Seed is essential Trek. Smart, tense, packed with world building, and elevated near the top of the pack thanks to Montalban's exceptional performance. Number 3 is The Balance of Terror, the episode that introduces the Romulans and is easily one of the best tension-driven episodes of not only this season, but the entire series. The episode plays out like a classic submarine thriller, with the Enterprise locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse against a cloaked Romulan ship that's been attacking outposts along the neutral zone. It's an effects-heavy episode by the show's standards, and while we don't really get a lot of space carnage, what we do get is more than enough. This is way less about the visual spectacle and more about the atmosphere, which is thick with tension. You really feel the gravity of the situation. The Enterprise truly feels in danger here. Mark Lenard is also awesome as the Romulan commander. I like the quiet respect between him and Kirk. Two leaders, both reluctant to fight, but ultimately duty-bound to do just that. I also love the Bird of Prey, which is easily one of my favourite non-Federation ship designs. I also like the way this episode is bookended by a wedding that tragically never happens, something that effectively sells the heartbreaking dangers of life in space. On top of that, the episode also tackles themes of bigotry and distrust with a solid arc between Spock and the Navigator, a B-plot that resolves in a satisfying way, with the two eventually overcoming their differences. There's a lot to love about this one. A taut, tight, thoughtful, emotional banger of an episode, and a true Trek classic. Number 2 is The City on the Edge of Forever. If you've got this at the top of your list, I'm not going to argue with you. It's undeniably an all-time great, not just for Trek, but television in general. Written by Harlan Ellison, City is a classic, although it's probably just as famous for all the behind-the-scenes drama as it is what we actually got on screen. I've always struggled with the setup where McCoy accidentally injects himself, goes nuts, and somehow becomes responsible for the collapse of the timeline. It's a stretch and feels more than a little clunky, and it's this aspect that holds the episode back from that true masterpiece status. But once Kirk and Spock follow Bones through the Guardian of Forever, this becomes a very different kind of episode. Kirk meets Edith Keeler, played wonderfully by Joan Collins, and the chemistry between these two is off the charts. Keeler is the walking, talking embodiment of all the show's best values: compassion, hope, idealism. She's a wonderful, aspirational human being, which just makes the tragedy of her death hit that much harder. That's probably a poor choice of words. What can I say about the ending? It's an all-timer. Kirk holding McCoy back as Edith is killed, all to restore the future as they know it. It's an absolute gut punch of a scene that never fails to elicit the proper emotional response. It doesn't really get much better than this, although I guess for me it does, but City on the Edge of Forever is a phenomenal episode and a true sci-fi classic, clunky first act aside. And number 1 is The Devil in the Dark. This, simply put, is Star Trek. This is the show at its absolute best, using sci-fi as a tool to remind us not to judge based on appearances or assumptions, and to always think before we pull the trigger. It's a simple but effective story that starts off as a pretty standard creature feature, with the Horta initially seen as a terrifying monster, killing miners in scenes that feel more like something you'd see in a slasher movie. The Enterprise is brought in to hunt the creature, but as Kirk and Spock close in, we learn that the Horta is actually an intelligent and mostly peaceful creature, a mother trying to protect her unhatched eggs, which represent the future of her entire species. This results in some powerful and profound moments. Kirk and Spock ensure a peaceful resolution, and we also get some fantastic McCoy moments, including some legendary lines from the Doctor, including the first instance of the iconic
"I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer."
Yes, some of the effects are dated. The Horta looks like a massive slice of pizza, and yes, some of the sets look like they were built out of paper mache. But it doesn't really matter. The story works. It's dramatic. It gets us thinking, and it gets us feeling. Crucial components that make for a great episode of Star Trek. I always say I was raised and moulded by Star Trek, and this episode is one of the best examples of that. This isn't just an episode of a silly science fiction show. This is a lesson and an hour that can make any viewer a better person. How would you rank TOS's first season? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more Star Trek reviews, and until next time, live long and prosper.